Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to tear into the market action from January 26th, leaning on some sharp analysis from PhilStockWorld.com. And let me tell you, it was a day of two completely different stories. You had the official story, the one all the headlines were screaming, which looked pretty good, but then there was the real story, the one traders were actually putting their money on, and that was a whole lot more chaotic. So let's get into it.
Okay, so right off the bat, you can see the huge contradiction we're talking about. The official story, the S&P 500 finished up a solid 0.5%. Not bad, right? But the real story was happening over in the gold market. You know, the ultimate, things are getting scary asset. It exploded, shooting up over $100 to a record high of over $5,000 an ounce. So what gives? How can investors be buying into a rally and preparing for the end of the world at the exact same time? And that's the big mystery we're trying to solve today. The S&P is telling us everything's fine, but then you look at the US dollar, which is falling, and this mad dash into gold, and that suggests there's some serious anxiety deep down in the system. To figure out what's really going on, we have to push past the headlines and get into the engine room of the economy.
All right, first stop, that huge piece of economic news that was driving the official story, a monster GDP growth number. But as the analysis from PhilStockWorld shows, that number, well, it's kind of an illusion. And there it is, 4.4% annualized GDP growth. I mean, on paper, that looks fantastic, doesn't it? It just screams booming economies, strong consumer, we did it, soft landing. It's the kind of number that makes headlines pop and gets politicians patting themselves on the back. But you gotta ask yourself, if the economy is so great, why is gold at $5,000?
This is where we get to the real math, according to the PhilStockWorld breakdown. So you start with that big, shiny 4.4% headline number. Okay, first you gotta knock off 3% for inflation. That gets you down to 1.4%. Still positive. But then you have to ask, how is this growth being paid for? Well, with the national debt at $40 trillion, that $2.5 trillion annual deficit adds another 6.25% in debt growth. You factor that in, and suddenly you're left with a real growth number of negative 4.75%. Ouch.
So if the economy isn't really growing, where is all this spending coming from? This chart tells the whole story. Real disposable income, that's what you have left after inflation chews up your paycheck. It's flat. Yet consumer spending just keeps ticking up. The fuel for this engine isn't people earning more money, it's a personal savings rate that has absolutely cratered to just 3.5%, which is near a decade low. People are literally draining their savings accounts just to keep up. And you know, this quote from Phil just hits the nail on the head. It perfectly captures the feeling behind these numbers. There's this massive disconnect between the official economic story and the financial reality for millions of people who are just watching their savings vanish to pay for groceries. So that's what's happening at home. But of course, none of this exists in a bubble. The other huge force pushing investors into the safety of gold is a dramatic spike in political chaos, and that is putting some intense pressure on the US dollar. You know, this satirical take on the recent Davos summit, it's funny, but it also just perfectly nails the global mood right now. That old rules-based international order feels like a distant memory, doesn't it? The world's leaders aren't even pretending to be in control anymore. They're all just reacting to whatever unpredictable threat comes out of Washington next. And a perfect example of this is what Phil calls the wheel of tariffs. I mean, one week it's Europe, the next it's Canada, with these threats of 100% tariffs over trade deals with China. If you're a global investor or a central bank, how are you supposed to plan for that? This constant, unpredictable trade warfare makes holding US dollars an incredibly risky bet. A reserve currency is supposed to be a shock absorber, not a mood ring. And this all boils down to a key concept from PhilStockWorld: information risk. Think about it. Just like markets price in credit risk, the risk you won't get paid back, they also price in the risk that a country's leadership is so unpredictable, you just can't trust the data or the policy from one day to the next. That risk is being priced into the US dollar right now, and it's dragging its value down. The former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, he just summed it all up perfectly. This isn't some temporary phase we're going through. It's not a simple transition. He calls it a fundamental rupture in the global system. And when the system ruptures, investors don't want promises from politicians. They want something real, something like a bar of gold. So, faced with all this chaos, what's a trader supposed to do? When volatility spikes like this, you can either panic or you can have a plan. And in the PhilStockWorld community, they are all about the plan. Look, when things get this wild, you really have two choices. You can be the gambler who sees all this volatility and starts buying up expensive lottery ticket options, just praying for a huge payout. Or you can be the house. And what does the house do? It does the exact opposite. It sells that expensive volatility to all the gamblers. A huge lesson from the AGI Round Table report was this simple phrase: don't be the premium donor. See, in a market this volatile, just buying a simple call option is like paying a massive upfront fee for that lottery ticket. The smarter move, the fix, is to restructure your trades. You sell that expensive volatility to someone else, creating a spread that can actually pay for itself. The goal is simple. Stop being the gambler at the table and become the casino. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. It's about having a real, disciplined framework. The PSW methodology uses tools like the 5% rule to mathematically map out the market's structure, to find those key support and resistance levels. It's about knowing the difference between a real, meaningful move and just random market noise. The message always is structure over emotion and focusing on probability, not prediction. So, when you put this all together, the flawed economic data, the geopolitical chaos, and the smart trader's playbook, it really all comes down to one critical skill: being able to separate the signal from the noise. So let's just lay out the real story in plain numbers. Here's the signal. You've got flat income, meaning no real wage gains for people. A personal savings rate at a miserable 3.5% near decade lows. A national debt ballooning to $40 trillion, which is just a future tax bill for everyone. And a dollar that's lost 3% of its value since Thanksgiving, which is basically just a hidden inflation tax. This isn't a forecast. This is the reality under the surface. At the end of the day, it's this simple. The S&P 500 hitting a new high, that's noise. That 4.4% GDP number, that's noise. The signal, the real signal, is the structural weakness in consumer finances, the slow debasement of our currency, and the global instability that's forcing everyone to rethink what risk really means. And that brings us right back to where we started. On any given day, the market is telling multiple stories. The official one is usually simple, it's loud, and it's reassuring. The real story? It's usually complex, it's messy, and it's a lot quieter. So the question you have to ask yourself is, which one are you listening to?